Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael O'Malley here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for August 19th, 2020, recorded around 3:51 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll take a look here first out in the Eastern Pacific Basin and Hurricane Geneva. It is still a hurricane, a Category 3 at the moment, with sustained winds of 115, although that is likely lower, and I'll show you why here that is in a second. But hurricane warnings now issued for portions of the Baja, California, and this is in response directly to the center coming a little bit closer and a little bit further east of where the National Hurricane Center forecast cone originally was. That's kind of shifted this cone envelope all the way over here. Now, likely what's going to end up happening is it's going to start making that turn, but where it makes that turn remains to be seen. And again, it is entirely possible that this might just graze right along the coastline here as a hurricane, a weakening hurricane, but a hurricane at that. And again, you might actually need hurricane warnings extended further up towards the north here as we go on throughout time. Right now, tropical storm warnings exist through this area, but you could see hurricane watches or warnings posted for these areas. But regardless, these tropical storm force winds here, this is kind of the brown color right here. Those areas are now moving into the Baja of California as the center will stay offshore. But heavy winds, obviously, heavy rain, squally conditions in general, heavy surf, rip currents, that's going to be all a problem, even all the way down into portions of the Mexican coastline. But this whole entire area is going to see impacts, whether or not it's direct impacts or indirect impacts from a Hurricane Geneva. So for you folks there, just keep an eye on things. And again, by Friday evening, this will now be pulling away from the Baja coast over here. So after Friday evening, there will be nothing else to worry about other than some surf conditions. The reconnaissance aircraft that was in there, again, did find that pressures were about 972 millibars. That's roughly about 12 millibars higher than the National Hurricane Center had actually put them at. And you can see the visible satellite presentation here, pretty decent. It does have a central dense overcast still, pretty decent. You can see the eye appearance here. The pressure is about 972, and we did not find any of those Category 3 winds up in here. We found Category 2, maybe Category 1 winds even. And again, that's indicative that this area is weakening. It's a weakening cyclone. This is the Baja up here. That's the Baja in the Cabo San Lucas resort areas. And again, that's kind of heading in this general direction. So you can see just how close it's really going to get. And it only takes another little wobble for the core to be brought on shore. So for you folks there, you definitely need to be preparing for what could be either a graze, a landfall even, or a close pass by with the core staying offshore. But that core is coming in pretty close, and again, if that turns just a little bit sooner, that is going to have implications for the resort areas and the Baja as a whole. So we will be watching that as we go on throughout the rest of the day. Now, for the Atlantic Basin, we have Invest Area 97L with now an 80% chance over the next 5 days and 60% over the next 48 hours. This was bumped up from earlier. And you can see, this area right down here in the Caribbean currently, and it's passing off of South America right now and Venezuela. This will be eventually moving out into the Western Caribbean, where conditions could become more favorable for development once it's out here. So this is going to pose a rainfall, mudslide, flash flooding, and some gusty wind concerns for the Western Caribbean. This even includes portions of Jamaica, especially in the higher terrain areas, those mountains, those very tall mountains in Jamaica that I've personally been to. It's a gorgeous sight there, but very susceptible, obviously, to water runoff. You get any of those training bands to come, through Jamaica, it could cause a problem. And again, so just something to be mindful of. And even down here into portions of Belize and Central America and the Yucatan, that is also going to become another situation for you folks down there. Now, for everyone else, though, Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, not really a problem there. The western part of Cuba will have to watch this over the next coming days or so, just as a precaution, and we'll show why that is here in a moment. Looking at the visible satellite imagery from the tropicaltidbits.com site here, a couple of things to really point out. First of all, again, our disturbance is still very loosely organized this evening. Again, it's still loosely organized. However, you can see that we do have kind of this axis right here, and our axis is now starting to tilt over, our wave axis, and you can kind of see that we do have a little bit more of centralized convection today over this area, but you notice what's kind of lurking way out here and even behind it a little bit, these arc clouds or outflow boundaries. As we talked about and alluded to earlier in my previous video, these outflow boundaries are basically these thunderstorms that go up and then they collapse. And it's no different than like normal summertime thunderstorms or thunderstorms in general. When they have a cool pool, or a cold pool, or whatever. I think it's cool pool, but it could be cold pool as well. But regardless, if there is a cold pool there, these thunderstorms, obviously, they tower up about 40, 50, 60,000 feet in the air. They bring down all the cooler air, excuse me, from the tops of the atmosphere, and they bring them down to the surface. They rush out and they fan out, and it generates outflow boundaries, and you can see that. Now, outflow boundaries, however, are indicative of dry air, and that's what you have. In tropical scenarios, you don't like to see dry air. You like to see moist air all the way up through a particular column. And in this case, we have a lot of outflow boundaries and arc clouds in here, so not really an ideal environment, but you can clearly see the circulation. I mean, it's definitely evident as this kind of wave axis starts to, tilt upright, and that's going to help, tropical cyclone genesis chances, but this dry air that's lurking is one more problem that it has to deal with. And again, favorable conditions really won't occur until once it's out here. It's still moving too fast right now at about 15 to 20 miles an hour. It's still moving too fast. There is some outflow, so that there isn't a lot of shear present in this vicinity, so that's a definitely good thing. But these dry air arc clouds, that's indicative of that, and that's not a healthy sign for a developing tropical cyclone. So that's one thing we'll have to watch here as we go on throughout time over the next few days or so. Now, talking about Invest Area 98L with a 90% chance of development over the next 5 days or so. Again, this is going to be one to watch as well as 97L out here. But this is going to be one to watch here over the next few days or so. And this is certainly one of the most intriguing situations that we've had to deal with in a little bit of a while. I'll talk about the models here in a second and what they're doing. But you can see, again, the current 5-day, marker here doesn't go all the way over to the islands here. However, this will be, or this will pose some threat to the Northern Lesser Antilles. Now, if you live in Barbados southward, that includes Trinidad and Tobago, you don't have to worry about this. This is going to be a northern event for the islands. So basically, from, St. Croix over here, San Juan, Puerto Rico, all the way down here, it is going to be something worth monitoring. But again, if you live from Barbados southward, you have no, I wouldn't say a 0% chance, because you never say never, but you really have less than a 1% chance of 98L directly affecting the islands far south here, the windwards in the far south islands. Really no threat to them. But for the northern islands, yes, this will pose a threat, mainly initially from heavier rainfall, gusty winds, and flooding, and certainly mudslides in some of those higher terrain islands. And again, this is not going to develop into a powerful, major, at least I think so, not develop into a powerful major hurricane on approach to the islands. Of course, you never say never, but right now the indications are that, yes, this will have a little bit of struggling, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Now, the visible satellite shot, though, tells a really good picture, and I don't like that it's buffering, but this is from earlier, and you can clearly see that we had a well-defined structure with it there. And again, that's a fairly well, organized structure, and there is banding that is clearly evident there. That's a clear indication of a lot of banding. And we move that just a couple of frames forward, really, and you can really see that it definitely has a fairly good amount of banding, and I just wish this didn't have to buffer so much, but that's fine. We'll try reloading it, see if it works. Sometimes these things really buffer. I'm not going to sit on this all day, but yeah. So anyway, you can clearly see, though, we have a fairly well-organized structure here in the atmosphere. And again, that's definitely a good sign of banding. You got these flows coming out of the south and kind of curling around, while in the meantime you got new convection that has fired over here, and that's developed pretty solidly as well. And you can actually see that all the way out here in the later parts of this. This is coming up on now. You can see our apparent low-level structure, low-level vorticity field is in here. More convection firing off to the south and southeast, wrapping around. Deep convection firing off towards the north and the north and west and north, rotating around a common axis. That seems to be right here. Yeah, I mean, this seems to be closing in on getting a tropical cyclone status to it, whether it's a depression or storm. I really feel like that the Hurricane Center will mention this at 8 o'clock, certainly. Probably not enough to pull the trigger on a 5 o'clock advisory. But, I mean, this has some good-looking structure to it, and diurnal maximum will really tell the tale, basically, for what's going to be going on. But that has a classic S-like signature to it. Very well organized here in the in the visible satellite shot, and even out here in the vorticity field at 850 millibars. That's actually our hurricane in the Eastern Pacific. That's what you optimally like to see for a strong tropical cyclone. This is 97L and that's 98L, and you can see both actually looking a little bit better today than they were yesterday around this time. Again, with the exception of 97L, that was a little bit more rounded and concentrated yesterday. But certainly for 98L, that's really trying to concentrate its energy, and this will eventually kind of break off in the intertropical convergence zone, move off towards the northwest, and this will be its own entity moving forward over the next few days or so. And one of the things that's rather concerning with this is the fact that these sea surface temperatures are very supportive for both 97 and 98L across this region. And again, a strong ridge of high pressure out in this vicinity is unlikely to allow 98L to kind of go around that ridge and stay on out to sea. So it looks like that whatever comes of 98L, whether it is just really an open wave or whether it's a bona fide tropical cyclone, it will have land impacts. But again, where specifically is hard to nail down at this point. But we can pretty much say that Trinidad, Tobago, Barbados, no threat to those islands at all from 98L. No threat to those islands at all. That this will not have a chance to sneak down. It would really have to do some really far southwesterly movement, and it's not going to do that. The ridge isn't that strong. So, good news for those islands. But for 97L, which is kind of positioned right in this vicinity, again, it's going to be moving into this amount of water. 30 to 31 Celsius water with very high upocean heat content in this part of the world. And it's going to be rather interesting to watch because some of the modeling today has been a little bit more aggressive with spinning up a tight little cyclone here and moving it potentially into the Gulf of Mexico. The 18Z runs actually, the 18Z model guidance backed away from just sending it into the Yucatan and actually pulls it either right off the Yucatan or into the Gulf completely and unobstructed basically from land. And obviously that's something that we are really going to have to monitor. Now, there will be a trough that is going to come down that is going to create some vertical wind shear across this region that might string out the moisture field a little bit. So even if this does become a tropical cyclone in this region, heavy rainfall effects could be felt pretty far away from it, depending on if there is sufficient shear or not. If there isn't, this thing obviously has a higher ceiling, but again, a lot determines on whether or not this actually becomes a tropical cyclone in this region to actually take advantage of all this warm water, because if not, this warm water serves no good. But with 98L obviously sitting back in this vicinity, somewhere right about here actually, that will be moving west-northwest into a very favorable environment out here in terms of thermodynamic environments. But as we can see here on the ship's diagnostic, this is basically the statistical dynamical, dynamical forecast here, and this is the intensity. Now this is the GFS version, but this is the ship's model. And one thing that we will have to point out right now, we are in a pocket for 98L of very low shear, and that remains that way for the next about 24 hours or so throughout tomorrow. After tomorrow, however, there will be an increase in shear. Now, it's not a lot. I mean, 15 to 16 knots of shear is not a lot. It's not like you're getting 25, 30 knots of shear just completely ripping it apart like what happened to Josephine, right? Josephine got entangled within 30, 40 knots of shear, completely tore it apart. However, we've seen instances, aka Hurricane Michael in 2018, where it was able to intensify under a moderate shear environment, which is 15 to 16 knots of shear, and it was able to intensify under that shear environment, and we know what happened. Now, this is not a repeat, obviously, but this is relatively interesting. Again, that's for 98L. But the shear will be increasing over the next 36 to 60 hours. Beyond that time, the shear really drops off for quite a while before picking up back here at the very end of the forecast. That's kind of way out in time. This is the 120-hour time frame right here. Again, this is going to have a decent chance of at least becoming a tropical storm, in my opinion. And again, it will have some hurdles, and we can see that illustrated pretty well here on the GFS forecast. This is the 12Z forecast running here, and we'll move this out here to the next 48 hours, and we'll see what we're talking about is, first of all, starting out with 97L down here. Now, there's a trough of low pressure that's digging in across here, and we can kind of see these enhanced PV streamers out through here. There's another one impacting 98L, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But this is going to induce some vertical wind shear across this region, and whatever moisture field is associated with 97L, you can kind of see how it eventually gets kind of strung out over the Gulf Coast states. And that is a very real possibility that there's just not enough vorticity and energy down here for the model to actually handle, and thus by 78 hours, this moisture is just all strung out, and through here, this trough is just kind of lingering, producing vertical wind shear, and 97L can't really take advantage of it. However, there's also a flip side to it where either this trough is a little bit slower, this trough is a little bit weaker, or it erodes quicker, and actually 97L is stronger by this time down here. And if that's the case and it can produce enough outflow, it is certainly possible that that could kind of put up a brick wall between the healthy diabatic outflow of 97 and the PV streamer causing vertical wind shear out here in the western Gulf of Mexico. That is entirely possible, but again, it all hinges on the next couple of days whether or not this actually decides to get going down here, because if it does, then it faces again this another obstacle with the PV streamer, and it's a lot of complicated interactions that the models can't sometimes resolve completely. So it is going to be something we'll have to watch. The model trends today have been still thinking maybe a tropical storm or whatever that does kind of come out of this, and it seems logical for that time. Now, if we back this up here to 48 hours, this is again by 7 a.m. Friday, and now we switch gears here to 98L, which is down here, and in the GFS it does now show a closed low-level center, albeit very weak at about 1,009 millibars. But you can see what's happening here. We have another PV streamer that's also impacting 98L as well. And what this is also going to do is if 98L isn't that strong, if 98L is not that strong, it is not going to be able to kind of put up that brick wall between the healthy diabatic outflow and the increasing vertical wind shear. Because sometimes if tropical storms or tropical cyclones rather are strong enough, they can produce that healthy outflow and all that kind of traverse banding and stuff, and that actually disrupts these PV streamers and the vertical wind shear associated with that. So, if it's not too strong, obviously. But again, assuming that it's not that strong and through here by hour 48, now what's going to start to happen is you get a little bit of interaction with that PV streamer. And again, it all depends, though, on how far north this system actually gets, because if it is a little bit farther to the west and south here, there is some potential that the vertical wind shear will not be as strong as it's going to be in this region. Conversely, if it's further north, there's a stronger shear amount up here, and thus it's going to have less of a chance to survive as it moves into a very hostile environment. We can see that very clearly. Now, here's another tropical cyclone in the GFS forecast here, more than likely. But, you can see that it really does nothing through the 5-day time frame and even beyond. And I'm just kind of struggling to understand why. And I think a lot of people are, because this PV streamer interaction is not going to be that detrimental. I mean, assuming that it can hold a closed low-level center, which seems to be like we're going to have very soon, if not almost already, and it maintains its convection, and if it doesn't interact with significant land, I don't know what the models are showing and seeing. Now, curiously enough, remember how the Euro didn't have any development yesterday? Well, this is the ensembles for today. This is basically a blend of all 51 different members that are ran using slightly different variables and outputs from the initial European run here, the initial deterministic run, and then basically it's ran 51 other different times. And basically those have different data that's assimilated, different inputs, different outputs, different configurations to give different outcomes. And we start to see finally a resurgence in both 97 and 98L here by only the 108-hour time frame. And I said this yesterday that the models, they don't have a good idea on this because we didn't have a closed level center, etc., etc., etc. Well, again, the models are probably going to play catch up. And you remember how Hannah was, how the models handled that atrociously. The GFS didn't even have a single closed isobar until this thing was almost a hurricane. Go figure. So my point is that we can't let this sneak up on us. Because the models don't show anything. Just because the models may not show anything does not mean it's not going to happen. And conversely, just because the models show something doesn't mean it's going to happen. Nothing's 100% until it happens in real time. But the inputs that we're seeing today is that 98L is definitely getting better organized. So I'm putting a lot of doubt on the deterministic Euro today. Although it was playing a little bit of catch-up, it did initialize a little bit stronger, and it produced a little bit stronger of a closed, finally, a closed isobar in here. Again, if the models drop this, I wouldn't be completely surprised, because the models are just not handling this well. And these crazy run-to-run variabilities only increases our uncertainty. And we just don't know a lot beyond the 5-day time frame. That's why if you live in the southeastern United States, if you live in the Gulf Coast regarding to 97 or 98L, we don't know yet. And it's going to take maybe another day or two. Now, fortunately for us, Recon is heading out tomorrow to both. Tomorrow night they're heading out to 98L, and then Friday they're heading out to 97L. But again, I mean, it looks like, it looks like that we are going to have something to talk about, and that's very important. And just real quick, I'm just going to throw this out here that, the models are starting to come into a fairly good track agreement, even through 96 and 72 hours, passing nearer just over Puerto Rico, nearer over Hispaniola, nearer over Cuba. And again, it's not all set in stone, obviously, because obviously we don't have a real trackable future at the moment. Until we get an actual tropical cyclone, we're just not going to have any general idea. So we'll be watching. The intensity guidance too, again, generally up, and has it pretty much as a tropical storm over the next about 12 to 36 hours. Not worried about that at the moment. Some people, and I've already seen it, posting these crazy runs, either the H-Wharf, the H-Mon, going berserk with a landfall somewhere as a major hurricane or whatever. We're not about the hype business here. So right now, yes, this is to be disregarded. Now, as a tropical storm, sure, this can be completely regarded. Even maybe a low-grade hurricane. Disregard the upper end of this distribution, though, and disregard, because of the simple fact that we just don't have a trackable future yet. And now, if all the models went up like that, sure, I mean, of course, then this would be something to be mindful of, but the models show a more gradual inclination towards a strong tropical storm or whatever by that point in time. So we will have to watch that, all right? So that being said, that is my second update for today. I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael Romali. If you guys do want to go follow me, make sure to follow me on Twitter at MikeRomali1. Links will be down in the description down below. I'll be posting consistent updates on there regarding Hurricane Geneva, Invest 97, and 98L. Have a great rest of your Wednesday afternoon and evening. I am Michael Romali. I'll talk to you guys again early tomorrow morning. Stay safe, everyone.